For centuries, the Mediterranean was the most dangerous water on Earth. Along the coast of North Africa, four states thrived on terror: Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli. For 300 years, their corsairs, pirates sanctioned by their rulers, had raided European shipping, captured crews, and sold them into slavery. The scale of their terror was staggering. Historians estimate that between 1530 and 1780, the Barbary corsairs captured and enslaved over 1 million Europeans, 1 million men, women, and children, dragged from their ships, snatched from coastal villages, sold in the slave markets of Algiers. Their reach extended far beyond the Mediterranean. In 1627, corsairs from Algiers sailed 3,000 miles across the Atlantic to raid Iceland, kidnapping over 400 villagers who would never see their homeland again. In 1631, they struck Baltimore, Ireland, carrying off the entire population of the village. From the coast of Cornwall to the shores of Italy, no one was safe. Entire coastlines were abandoned. In Italy and Spain, villages moved inland away from the terror that came from the sea. Watchtowers rose along Mediterranean shores, hundreds of them, still standing today, built so peasants could flee before the corsairs landed. The island of Formentera in Spain was completely depopulated. Its people simply left. And the great powers of Europe? They paid bribes, ransom, annual tribute in gold, weapons, and naval supplies. It was extortion on a continental scale, and it worked. The Barbary rulers grew fabulously wealthy. Algiers swelled to over 100,000 inhabitants, its population enriched by centuries of plunder and slave labor. People bought European luxuries for their homes and palaces with profits of human misery. The great powers of Europe paid tribute to avoid attack, bribes, ransom. When America won independence in 1783, it lost British naval protection. American merchant ships were suddenly prey. In 1785, Algerian corsairs captured two American ships, the Maria and the Dauphin. The crews, 21 men in total, were dragged ashore in chains. Some would remain enslaved for over a decade. The new United States had no navy, no way to fight back, and so, like the Europeans, America began to pay. By 1800, the United States was paying nearly 20% of its federal budget in tribute to the Barbary states, one-fifth of everything the nation earned just to keep American sailors out of chains. But in 1801, a new president took office, a man who believed there was another way. Thomas Jefferson had been arguing against tribute for years. Millions for defense, the saying went, but not 1 cent for tribute. Now he had the power to act. Tripoli was ruled by Yusuf Karamanli, a man who had seized power by murdering one brother and exiled another. He was ruthless, ambitious, and convinced that America was weak. In early 1801, Yusuf demanded a new treaty. with dramatically higher payments. When the American consul refused, Yusuf gave him an ultimatum: pay or face war. On May 14, 1801, Yusuf sent men to the American consulate with axes. They chopped down the flagpole, the traditional declaration of war. Jefferson's response was immediate. Before Congress even reconvened, he sent 4 workships across the Atlantic. The new United States Navy was going to war. The squadron was commanded by Commodore Richard Dale, a Revolutionary War veteran who had served under John Paul Jones. His orders were simple: blockade Tripoli and protect American shipping. It was America's first overseas military expedition, the first test of whether a new nation could project power across an ocean, and it was about to become a quagmire. On August 1st, 1801, the schooner USS Enterprise encountered the Tripolitan corsair Tripoli. What followed was a brutal 3-hour battle. When it was over, the Tripoli had lost 30 dead and 30 wounded. The Enterprise 0 casualties. It was a stunning victory, but under his orders, the Enterprise's captain had to release the captured ship. Congress hadn't formally declared war. The war settled into a frustrating pattern. American ships blockaded Tripoli's harbor, but Yusuf refused to negotiate. He had time, he had patience, and he was waiting for America to make a mistake. In October 1803, America made one. The USS Philadelphia was one of the finest frigates in the world, 36 guns, 307 crew, capable of devastating any Barbary corsair. Her captain was William Bainbridge, an experienced but unlucky officer who had already lost one ship to the French. On October 31st, 1803, the Philadelphia was chasing a Tripolitan vessel close to shore when disaster struck. The ship ran aground on an uncharted reef. For hours, Bainbridge tried everything to free his ship. They threw cannons overboard, cut away the foremast, pumped water out of the hold. Nothing worked. The Philadelphia was stuck, and Tripolitan gunboats were closing in. With enemy boats surrounding him and no hope of escape, Bainbridge made the agonizing decision to surrender. 307 American sailors became prisoners of the Bashaw of Tripoli. It got worse. A storm floated the Philadelphia off the reef. The Tripolitans towed her into harbor, repaired her, and now possessed an American frigate, a weapon that could be used against American ships. The crew was paraded through the streets of Tripoli, pelted with rocks and refuse. They were thrown into a former warehouse, 307 men crammed into a space designed for storing cargo. For the next 19 months, they would remain prisoners. Yusuf demanded $3 million for their release, an impossible sum. The war had turned into America's worst nightmare. Commodore Edward Preble knew the Philadelphia could not remain in enemy hands. The Tripolitans were already mounting her guns. Soon she would be used against American ships. Preble needed someone crazy enough to do the impossible. Stephen Decatur volunteered. The plan was audacious. They would use a captured enemy vessel, renamed the Intrepid, to sneak into Tripoli harbor at night. Decatur and 74 volunteers would board the Philadelphia, overwhelm the guards, set fire to the ship, and escape before the harbor guns could destroy them. On the night of February 16, 1804, the Intrepid slipped into Tripoli harbor. 75 men on a tiny boat, sailing past shore batteries into the heart of enemy territory. The Tripolitans on the Philadelphia saw them coming but were fooled. The Intrepid looked like a local merchant vessel. When Decatur's men called out in Arabic that they'd lost their anchors, the guards let them approach. "Americanos," someone shouted, and Decatur's men swarmed over the sides. The fighting was brief and brutal. Armed with swords and pikes, no firearms to alert the harbor, Decatur's men killed or drove overboard every Tripolitan on the ship in less than 10 minutes. Not a single American was killed. Now came the dangerous part. Decatur's men scattered through the ship with combustibles, lint, gunpowder, anything that would burn. Within minutes, flames were spreading from the gun deck to the rigging. The harbor exploded with activity. Shore batteries opened fire, the castle guns boomed, but Decatur's men were already scrambling back to the Intrepid, pushing away from a ship that was becoming an inferno. The Philadelphia's loaded guns began to fire as the flames reached them, some of them aimed directly at the castle where Yusuf Karamanli was watching in horror, his prize, his leverage, his captured American frigate burning to the waterline. The Intrepid escaped through a storm of cannon fire, rolled out by men whose faces were lit by the flames behind them. They had been in harbor less than 20 minutes. When the news reached Europe, Admiral Horatio Nelson, the most famous naval commander in the world, called it the most bold and daring act of the age. Stephen Decatur returned home a hero, but 307 Americans were still in chains. The war wasn't over. By 1804, the war had stalemated. American ships bombarded Tripoli multiple times, but Yusuf wouldn't surrender. The prisoners remained in chains. Something radical was needed. Enter William Eaton, the former American consul to Tunis, a man who believed the answer wasn't in the harbor, but in the desert. Yusuf Karamanli had a brother, Hamed, the rightful heir, who had been exiled years ago. Eaton's plan was to find Hamed, raise an army, march 500 miles across the Libyan desert, capture the city of Derna, and use it as a base to threaten Tripoli itself. It was insane. It was also their only option. Eaton found Hamed in Egypt, living in poverty. Together, they assembled the strangest army in American history. 8 Marines, 2 Navy midshipmen, about 40 Greek mercenaries, a handful of Arab cavalry, and several hundred Bedouin warriors who joined them for plunder. On March 8, 1805, this army of about 500 men, led by an American diplomat with no military training and supported by 8 US Marines, began marching west across the desert. The march was a nightmare. They ran out of food. The Bedouin threatened to mutiny multiple times. Eaton held the force together for sheer willpower, occasionally at gunpoint. After 50 days, 500 miles across one of the harshest landscapes on Earth, they reached Derna. Derna was defended by 800 soldiers loyal to Yusuf. Eton had fewer than 500 exhausted men, many of whom had never fought together. But offshore, three American warships were waiting: the Nautilus, Hornet, and Argus. On April 27, 1805, the attack began. The ships opened fire on the harbor fortifications while Eton led this ground forces against the wall. The assault was chaos. Eton was shot through the wrist but kept fighting. Lieutenant Presley O'Bannon led the Marines and Greek mercenaries in a charge up the ramparts of the harbor fortress. At 3:45 p.m., O'Bannon tore down the enemy flag and raised the stars and stripes over the fortress. It was the first time the American flag had been raised in victory on foreign soil. Derna fell. Yusuf Karamanli, watching his eastern flag collapse, suddenly became very interested in negotiations. On June 4th, 1805, a treaty was signed. The 307 American prisoners were finally freed after 19 months of captivity. America paid $60,000 for their release, a fraction of Yusuf's original $3 million demand. The treaty was controversial. William Eaton was furious. He believed one more push would have toppled Yusuf entirely. Hamed, who had been promised the throne, was abandoned. He would live out his days in exile. But the war had achieved something profound. America had proven it would fight. No longer would the United States pay tribute to anyone. The age of appeasement was over. The Barbary states tried again in 1815 during the Second Barbary War. Stephen Decatur, now Commodore, returning with a squadron of warships. In 48 hours, he captured two Algerian vessels and forced a treaty that ended tribute forever. For Lieutenant Presley O'Bannon, Derna brought special recognition. In gratitude for the victory, Hamed Karamanli presented him with a Mameluke sword, a curved blade of the kind carried by Ottoman warriors. It was more than a gift, it was a symbol. Today, after more than 2 centuries later, every Marine officer still carries a sword modeled after O'Bannon's gift, the same curved blade, the same golden hilt, a direct line from the shores of Tripoli to every Marine who serves today. And when the Marine Corps chose its emblem, the eagle, the globe, and anchor, they were choosing to remember the eagle for the nation they serve, the globe for the worldwide service that began at Derna, the anchor for the naval traditions that carried 8 Marines across the Mediterranean to make history. When the Marine Corps chose its anthem, they reached back to that moment in 1805, to the first planned battle on foreign soil, to the flag raised over an enemy fortress.
From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli.
The Barbary Wars taught America that freedom isn't free, and that sometimes the only response to tyranny is force. The 8 Marines who marched to Derna crossed 500 miles of desert to prove that point. They were the first, but not the last. 200 years later, their legacy is still sung around the world, carried in the swords of every Marine officer, etched into the emblem of the corps itself. To the shores of Tripoli. Thanks for watching this series. I really appreciate you spending your time here. If you liked it, don't forget to press the like button, subscribe, and perhaps share it with somebody who might enjoy it as well. See you in the next one.